What's going on, guys? Matt at Middleton Motorsports here with another episode of Behind the Tune. Today on the dyno, 2005 Mustang GT. So I'm going to flip the camera around and we'll go take a look at what we got here. So this car came to us pretty much completely stock, and we did a couple things to it. So we did some suspension work. We did the Ford Performance spring Swaybar and Panhard bar kit. So we dropped the stance a little bit. We did a Borla catback exhaust system, and we did a JLT Cold Air. So it's up on the dyno for a tune, obviously. The JLT that we bought is the larger diameter, so this moves from a 3-inch MAF housing that the stock box has, the stock tube and box, up to this larger JLT. So the JLT diameter here is quite a bit bigger than the factory, so you do have to tune these. You do have to pretty much double the mass airflow curve in the tune to get these intakes to work. I believe the C&L from back in the day, which I believe C&L might still make those, same type of deal. It's the tune-only intake. That obviously gives us the largest performance gain, and since we were tuning it anyway, we figured let's do the larger intake. So basically that's it. It's just it still has the stock manifolds and catalytic converters on it. Again, it's just a catback exhaust, and yeah, we didn't really do much other than that in the way of performance. So this guy didn't want to go super crazy, just wanted to bump the power just a smidge and add some sound to it, obviously, with the mufflers. So it is a 5R55, so it's a 5-speed automatic. It is not a stick shift, so it is an automatic car. And where we're at so far, 274 and about 295 torque. I did not get a baseline on this car. Typically, I've seen 240 to 250 at the rear tire SAE on these 3-valve S197 cars with the automatics. The manual's dyno a smidge higher. I am dynoing the car in 4th gear. That is the 1-to-1 on that 5-speed auto. So that is the gear I'm dynoing it in. I did actually, so what I do on these automatics where they don't have like a paddle shift option is I actually write a trans tune specifically for the dyno, so it'll shift up into 4th gear, lock the torque converter, and then hold it when I roll the throttle to the floor. It won't downshift out of 4th. So basically it just won't ever go into 5th gear, and once I get it into 4th, it won't downshift if I'm above, you know, about 30 miles an hour is what I set it to, the 4 to 3 shift. I set that really low so I can bring it up above that, and then it'll just hold 4th gear with the torque converter locked. So that's how I'm dynoing this. 4th gear with the torque converter locked. I'm commanding it with the stock ECU. So that's where we are so far. Air, fuel, and timing look good. This is 91 octane, so we're not getting crazy with fuel or timing. I'm basically up against the knock sensors. That's where it's making the most power. So I am letting the factory knock control kind of dictate the timing a little bit. Obviously, I went in and massaged the borderline table and some of the modifiers for timing and fuel, the timing adders for the open loop power enrichment, just to kind of get it to where it's not adding or taking too much timing away. Obviously, I'm letting that timing system kind of do its thing a little bit, but I don't want it to be trying to pull 3 degrees or add 4 degrees. I want it to run where it's kind of, you know, dancing a plus or minus degree or so. So this is where I are for so far. This is pretty much where we're gonna be at. So I'm gonna set the camera down. We're gonna do one more rip on the dyno. I'll get that on video, and then we'll take a look at the data log. And I'll get this one off the dyno, and I can get it out on the street tomorrow and take it for a little ride, make sure the trans shift's right, and he's gonna come pick it up and enjoy the nice weather we're having. All right, guys, looks like we backed that up. I'm just gonna jump up on here and click this door shut quick because the key's in, it's beeping at me. So anyway, 275, 296 torque, a little bit of a cool down on that run, but coolant temp might have been just a few 2-3 degrees cooler than those other runs, and the intake temp, it did sit for 10 minutes or so. So yeah, it cooled off a smidge. It wasn't a back-to-back pull. And it took a little bit more timing. It took me right up to the cylinder pressure limit I set, and we can look at that in the data log. 28 degrees of timing out here. It was kind of dancing, so you can see that blue pull That actually is where it pulled some timing when it was a little hotter on kind of a back-to-back pull. And the green took it right up to the edge of the cylinder pressure limit that I have set, which I raise over factory. There's a table called cylinder pressure, and most of this vintage all the way up to the newest stuff has a cylinder pressure limit that will limit the spark based on load and RPM, and it's just kind of a top cap on spark, and you can raise and lower it all you want, and it's just kind of a final say. It'll override all the other tables. So yeah, it ended up, and it made, I mean, literally the red run here is 27 degrees of timing, and then this is 28 degrees of timing. So we're not even picking up 1 horsepower, so you can see we're there on the timing, and it just marginally made a little more out through the top, probably because the intake manifold was just a smidge cooler, and it took a little more. So, but otherwise, the curve looks really nice. I'm just gonna close all of them, and we'll just open up that last one I did so you can kind of get an idea of what the curve looks like. Obviously these 3 valves they're single overhead cam, but they do have VCT. So it does make for a pretty, even with the stock camshafts, it makes for a pretty flat power curve. You can see obviously after, we're kind of done on producing more power, 5200 or so, but you can see as the camshafts retard, that it does extend the power out, and I think the shift point's set out here. I might bump the shift point up just a smidge, because I think they're set about 5,800 to 6. I think a couple hundred more RPM could benefit, just so on the shift recovery you're not dropping it so far down here. These 5 speeds aren't as close as, let's say like a 10 speed. They don't have that real close gear spacing, so shift recovery is pretty big chunk of RPM. So even if you can extend out a couple hundred RPM, car might just be a smidge quicker. But yeah, that's looking really good. Curves looks good, typical for an NA IRMRC car. Pull this key out so it's not beeping at us. We'll take a look at the data log. So like what I was talking about here, kind of wind back here. This is a 331 gear car and a 1-to-1. The pull is kind of long when you're only making, sub 300 wheels. So what I was talking about here, the timing, just like in an S550 car, same type of deal. Ford did this in these processors and the early Coyotes and then the later Tricore stuff. They all use kind of a floating timing deal. It's kind of a closed loop timing system. Later on, they called it an HDFX, high degree of freedom executive. I don't know what they really called it on this vintage of ECU, but same idea. So you can kind of see how here we're adding around 2 degrees of timing. That's like I was saying, I want to make it so it's, when first couple pulls I did, it was adding like 4 degrees here and it was pulling like 3 degrees up top. So I kind of smoothed the curve out a little bit. Yeah, I'm looking at this and talking to you guys at the same time, but you can see how it's allowing quite a bit of timing in the mid-range. And then as the cams start to retard and the cylinder pressure and the load actually starts to come up, it brings the timing down. And that's pretty typical of a kind of a moderately powered NA deal where they usually take quite a bit of timing down in the bottom end. Here's like 33,000 RPM before the intake manifold reaches kind of peak efficiency and the cams reach peak cylinder pressure and efficiency. But you can see, near around peak torque here, peak torque was about 4,100. You can see that's where the timing is at its lowest, is right around that 4 to 4,500 where the peak torque is. So, and then from there you can see it's still adding a few, and then towards the top end there it just kind of flattens out, and that's where I have that cylinder pressure table maxed, the combustion pressure limit. So you can see I have it set to 28. Factory is like 25. Yeah, so I allow some more. Obviously that helps with power production up top. But a couple of the 2 pulls I did before this, it was actually pulling a couple degrees of timing up here when it got hot. So I don't think it really needs, and again, 27 to 28 was only 1 horsepower, not even. So I'm going to call that, and based on previous experience with these 3 valves, 28 is pretty much all in on the timing, and there's no reason to add any more than that. So. And if it has to, it can pull some out of the top if it needs to. But I'm pretty much right there. That's where it's happy, 27, 28. It might pull a degree when it's really hot. It'll be 26. But that's what the system can do, is kind of adapt to that. So, but yeah, I mean, coolant temp was 194. Cylinder head temp was 198. So the engine was warmed up, like street temp type temperatures. So The intake temp was just a smidge cooler that run. We were at like 81. That previous on the blue run in the dyno graph, it pulled a little timing because I had intake temps closer, like 95, because I did some hot pulls. So this one I have an external wideband hook to, because these do not have factory widebands like the Tricore stuff does or S197 stuff. So I do have external wideband, so that's what is in the yellow here, basically kind of like how the GMs. I might pull a little feel here. It gets a little funky. This particular mass air setup on these things, the resolution on the curve isn't the greatest, so sometimes you end up with these little chunks of rich or lean. So you can kind of see how, and I'll kind of go over this with you guys. So what I'm paying attention to is right here is the mass airflow sensor voltage. So that's the voltage being output to the ECU per se. We'll call it like that. So you can see 275, 277, 278, 28, right about 2.8 volts. It is rich, and then subsequently 2.9 volts, it actually goes about as lean as I want to see it. Well, the curve, there isn't a lot of resolution in that area. So we jump from 2.8 right to 3. So I could go through and adjust the actual, if I can see what you guys I'm talking about here. I can adjust the actual voltage here on the scale, but for something like this, you're talking about probably picking up maybe a foot-pound of torque in that small little area, and it's just, you start chasing that, and it's not really worth it. It's not going to make the car any faster. It's not going to accelerate any faster. Being an automatic, you roll your foot onto it, and you're never really going to be starting from 3,200 RPM. So this particular system, where the mass airflow sensor is mapped in that manner, where you got kind of gaps between, so what I really would be wanting to do would be, if I do lean this out at, and I could probably pull a little bit of the fuel at 2.8 volts, but subsequently it's going to pull some fuel here, because the next cell on the mass airflow curve is 3 volts, which is out here. So you can see it'll probably lean this up, but it'll also lean this little spike up more than I'd like. So I'd rather just have it a little richer and have it where I want here. So you end up with, sometimes you'll end up with some waves like that. I also believe that's probably about where, and I don't do a lot of 3 valves, so I don't memorize where the IMRCs are opening, and it may be right about there is that they're opening. So you end up with variable cams moving, IMRCs opening, and sometimes you get a little whoop-dee in the air-fuel curve. Again, we're not super rich, we're not super lean. It's just kind of falling in between the range of acceptable to me. So I'm going to call that okay. I'm not going to worry about that little curve in it, because it's so brief. It's literally through a, like here we're fine. It's a little rich here. It gets kind of, this was liking about 0.86 lambda. That's where it was taking the most timing. So yeah, we're talking about a 400 RPM kind of area where it's a little rich. So I'm just really not worried about that. The rest of it out here, you can see I have it really nice and flat, where the actual, if you are to the floor in this automatic car, this is where you're going to be running it. It's going to be above 4,000 RPM. So you can see 0.85, 0.86, that's where it was happy. That's where it was kind of taking the most timing. Towards the end, I was leaning it out a little bit more. Typically, you pick up a little bit power after peak torque if you have it a little leaner. But again, that's still not really that lean. That's still high 12s for your fuel. So if you're talking a gasoline scale. So yeah, to me, this looks really good. Like I said, I'm not worried about that little whoop-dee here in the mid-range. That's just an artifact of the cams moving and the IMRCs moving, and it's really not going to hurt anything. It's, it's not going to kill our power or torque at all. So yeah, otherwise this is looking really good. The rest of the curve is real flat. You can see here, and then after the whoop-dee, it's nice there. So yeah, timing, like I said, it was taking a bunch of timing in this mid-range here, and it liked having that timing. That's where it made that, it makes almost 300 foot-pounds of torque in the mid-range here. So that's what it liked, having that timing kind of before peak torque. Yeah. Otherwise, there's really not a whole lot more to this. Being stock manifolds, again, knowing from past experience on these, there's really not anything to be gained by moving the cams around at all. Headers, different story. If it had long tube headers on it, definitely. Then you can move the IMRC point and the VVT a little bit for some gains for sure. But having stock manifolds, stock cats, there's just really nothing to be gained with the moving the cams around at all. Ford did their homework on that. So, and the mufflers in the back, the cat back, there's really no gain there because the catalytic converters are the restriction in the exhaust. And since they are in front of the mufflers, there's, you know, they're the restriction. There's no restriction behind them that's greater. So other, you know, from here, it's, you know, basically it was just getting the fueling right with that big mass airflow sensor and with the JLT, and then getting the timing kind of where it was happy, just from those changes. So yeah, this is looking really good. Like I said, the power curve looks nice. Log looks nice. I'm happy with it. So I'm gonna get this one unstrapped and then we'll take it for a ride. Might firm up the shifts a little bit at wide open throttle, just to give it a little bit more snap when you're onto the floor. He wasn't overly worried about making the most power out of this thing. He just wanted something a little more sound, a little more power. Nothing he's racing. He just cruises around with the top down in the summer and enjoys it. So that's gonna wrap it up for this one, guys. Appreciate you guys watching the channel, and keep checking back for more videos. We got lots more coming down the pipeline, and we'll talk to you guys later.